Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
I think the big thing is getting the messaging right. So I think if you think, I'm just going to do 30 steps, and because it's 30 steps, the messaging can be rubbish. Actually, because I do like this high volume approach, I feel like the messaging actually becomes even more important. I slightly differ with the LinkedIn and email approach, and I think it is good to get a meeting on that call. And the only reason is because the phone is actually an interactive channel.
Hello, Sales Nation. My name is Will Barron, and I'm the host of the Salesman Podcast, the world's most downloaded B2B sales show. On today's episode, we have the legend, Michael Hanson. You can find out more about Michael over at growthgenie.co. And on today's episode, we're getting into the ultimate sales cadence. We're going to explain what a cadence is, what goes in the beginning, the middle, and the end of it. Does it even end? That's another question that I asked Michael in this episode. And there's a ton of value if you're doing any outbound outreach. Everything that we talk about in this show is available in the show notes over at salesman.org. And with that said, let's jump right into it. Right, so we're going to dive into the ultimate outbound sales cadence, and we'll get into how we can define that, what that means in a second, and how we can justify the title of this podcast episode. But Michael, for people who aren't familiar, and this would have been me 4 or 5 years ago, I wouldn't have been familiar with a sales cadence when I was selling medical devices. Yeah. What is a sales cadence? What does that term mean?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I definitely make the mistake myself of thinking everyone knows what a sales cadence is, because some people call it a sequence. Essentially, it's the steps that you need as a salesperson to reach someone. So there's different types of cadences. So you may have a cadence for a cold lead that you're trying to turn into a sales opportunity or a qualified meeting, or maybe you've already got someone in the pipeline, you haven't spoken to them for a while, they've gone cold, and you're trying to get them onto another meeting. And then essentially you're going to come up with a formula, right? It's steps that you're going to use across particular channels. So I know we're going to talk about R1 later, but that's 30 touches, and it's the touches across LinkedIn, email, phone, or some people use other channels. Those are the 3 I recommend, but some people are doing like Facebook and all kinds of stuff. And then just to give you an example, like first day, typically our cadence is we send an email, don't ask for a meeting in the email. We connect with them on LinkedIn, and then based on LinkedIn, we'll do a bit of research and we'll try to call them. Typically, people don't pick up their phone nowadays on the first try, so you have to try again 2 days later. So essentially, we're doing steps like that every 2 days, and you can use sales engagement platforms to essentially track that. So you could log in at the start of your day and it would say, okay, you've got 50 contacts and you need to send them emails and give them a call. And that's essentially what a cadence is. It's outlining what those steps are.
And again, for someone who's not familiar with this, you use 2 terms here, which I think are really useful. Is it a formula in that if the buyer does this, then we do that, and it goes into this tree of just a mess of potential opportunity and things that we do need software to keep on track of? Yeah. Or can it be as simple as you outlined then of email, LinkedIn, phone call, and that could be considered a cadence?
Yeah, I think the big thing is getting the messaging right. So I think if you think, I'm just going to do 30 steps, and because it's 30 steps, the messaging can be rubbish. Actually, because I do like this high volume approach, I feel like the messaging actually becomes even more important. Yeah. And to answer your question about, they're kind of like, if they do this, you've got to do something else. I try not to think about that too much. The idea with the cadence is just to have a conversation. That's the thing that people forget about. So when we released this cadence, it was our most popular bit of content. And I think it wasn't because it was such a great piece of content or like that mind blowing. It was because people thought, wow, 30 touches, that's insane. It's so many touches. But actually, the idea is just to have a conversation with someone. So it's not like you're going to have 30 conversations. It's saying that you may need to call someone 10, 15 times just for them to pick up once, or you may need to send them 6 emails for them to reply, essentially. So.
Perfect. And that's what I wanted to get out of you just to start the show with the goal here isn't just to set up a sequence of emails and automated voicemails and walk away, right? We're putting our plan of attack together as opposed to using automation to do a lot of the work for us. Is that fair?
It's a mixture, right? So there's certain things you can automate and certain things that should be personalized. So a great tactic that we're using at the moment is sending like polls. So you could either do this on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's got this poll function that you've probably seen, or you could just send an email. Would love your quick feedback as a VP of sales. Like, what's your top outbound sales challenge right now? So that's one we send that's very relevant to our business. And I could put implementing sales technology, relevant messaging, etc. And then that can actually be automated. You could just be like, I'm going to send that to VPs of sales. Then if they respond saying relevant messaging, then I can send them a personalized message afterwards that's relevant to that challenge. Obviously, if they don't respond, I'm going to send a different type of email. So certain parts can be automated, and then other parts we recommend personalizing. Something I typically do is, obviously there's a lot more email automation tools than like there is LinkedIn automation tools as well, but I try not to go into that now. But typically automate emails, and then you can do like a more personalized approach on LinkedIn and calling. That can be one approach. Or again, you could maybe have 4 emails that are automated, 4 emails that are personalized. Just depends on the kind of the resources and talent and research that you have internally.
Got it. Cool. That makes perfect sense. Okay, so if we are going to build the ultimate outbound sales cadence, then Michael, what is the goal here? What's the end outcome? What can we do that what goals can we set that we can tick off as in this is the greatest sales cadence of all time? What do we need to achieve to make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, like anything in sales, right? The ultimate goal is revenue, to close deals. But essentially, what you're doing with a cadence is almost like nurturing someone into a conversation. So, like I said, typically, like at least the first 2 touches, both on LinkedIn and email, we never ask for a meeting. We do the whole like give before you take approach. So, like if I knew a company was hiring SDRs, for example, I'd send their VP of sales an email saying, "Hey, I noticed you're hiring SDRs at your company. Would you mind looking at a list of interview questions that may be helpful in the hiring process?" So just giving them something that's relevant and then kind of warming them up that way. But to answer your question, it's essentially the goal is to get a qualified meeting, to have a conversation with that person on the phone to discuss kind of what you do. And then from there, obviously, the goal is to actually close a deal, right? But essentially, a cadence, the main goal of a cadence is to get someone on like a Zoom call where you can discuss further information with them. And what you're doing through those 30 steps is kind of nurturing them towards that.
Got it. So if we had to put a number on it, it would be, we would look at a number of sales qualified leads that we have at the moment, number of closed deals, and we need to beat that by being more effective or efficient.
Yeah, exactly. That's totally it. So it's a mixture of like the formula, as you said, like how many touches are you doing on these channels? And then of course the messaging. So that's typically what I'll do with companies. I'll go in and say, okay, send me your cadences at the moment, or your sequences, as I said, as some people use that term. And then I'll be like, okay, the messaging, we need to change the messaging, or we'll say the messaging is quite good, but I think we should add more touches. Maybe they're going in for the meeting straight away, but the meeting email is good. And I'm like, let's maybe give a piece of content away before we're asking for that meeting.
Cool. Okay, so let's start from scratch then. Let's say that Sam's a salesperson. We'll talk about automation tools and stuff in a second. We'll get onto that. I feel like that's all the fun and easy stuff to spend money on and talk about later on. But say Sam, brand new salesperson, he's only ever done with no real thought about it, LinkedIn message, email message, call. And that's what he does. He's got a CRM, so he's tracking-ish the amount of contact that he's doing to individuals. But where's the starting point for Sam with all of this?
Yeah, I think everything starts with the pains of your buyer persona, right? Or your ideal customer profile. It's the thing that every sales consultant or trainer will tell you, but unfortunately there's still so many people that are product pitching. I'm sure a lot of people listening have had that, where someone connects with them on LinkedIn and straight away they get a 10-paragraph email pitching a product or service. So think about in those opening LinkedIn or email messages, think about the pains that your ideal customer profile are going through, and then align with marketing. A lot of my background is actually marketing, which is why I'm big into this, give before you take. And then think about pieces of content that are essentially giving them advice that can help with those challenges. Like I mentioned one before, I know if a company's hiring SDRs, they're like, what do we look for in an SDR? Because there's a lot of different things. Some people say you should hire someone experienced. Some say it should be someone green who you can kind of nurture. So that's why I send a piece of content related to that. Obviously, in your business, you need to think about what are the challenges of your buyer and how you can get around that. So that's what kind of the approach for LinkedIn and email. And then the other thing as well, I've kind of missed actually a very important part here, which is the data And the data is actually the people that you're targeting is normally where campaigns go wrong from all the clients that I've worked with. So especially if we're using automation tools, automation can work very well, but only if you segregate your lists into different buyer profiles. So you can either do that by job title. So for example, if I selling Growth Genie, we typically have 3 job titles we sell to: a head of marketing, a head of sales, or CEO of a small company, but they've all got different challenges. So I'm going to separate those. I'm going to separate via industry. So good ideas to target industries where you've got case studies that can get their attention. And then a last one, which actually a lot of people don't think about, are triggers, right? So a trigger could be like hiring SDRs, like I mentioned for us, or hiring another position that's relevant to your ideal customer profile. Using a particular software that you integrate with, companies going through a merger and acquisition, companies launching a product. And these are all things that you can build lists using various different vendors out there. And then you can actually send automated emails and they seem personalized even though they aren't, because you've essentially used these triggers.
Sure. Let's dive into deeper this idea of triggers for a second. Are there any tools or automation we can do to uncover some of these trigger events, especially such as a merger, acquisition, something like that? I monitor this within the sales industry just by following companies on LinkedIn, but it's not very efficient. But I'm also only really targeting for ad space for the podcast and stuff like that, say 50 companies. So it can be done at almost a glance, a couple of times a week. I can pull some of this out. But what do we do if our target market is far broader than that? Is there any tools that we can use to automate the trigger event side of things?
Yeah, sure. So you've got companies like Apollo or like ZoomInfo is a bigger one, Cognizant as well, from the UK. And some of the ones like I mentioned there, like I can literally find lists of companies who are hiring SDRs. I just put that in Cognizant and it will pull up a list of companies, and then I can get the job titles, etc. Rounds of funding. These are all things that you can actually use. So again, your messaging can be based on triggers, and you haven't had to, like you said, go on the internet, do an insane amount of research. You can just kind of do it with the click of a button through these tools.
So when we come on to their messaging, because I feel like what we've discussed so far is it can be done. A blog post can describe a lot of the steps that we've just outlined, Michael.
Yeah.
But the messaging is clearly, copywriting is an art as well as a science, right?
Yeah.
So how do we go about crafting that first message? Is there a series of rules? Is there a somewhat of a template that you use? How do we go about that first giving email before we ask for a meeting?
Yeah. I like to keep things super short. I think even though everyone's going this way, I still think a lot of people I work with are very shocked by how short that I keep things. And say it's that first email, I would do either like one sentence about the pain. Typically, a VP of sales like yourself has X pain. Here's a piece of content that I think can help you solve it, or a trigger, right? This has happened at your company. Here's a piece of relevant content. That's more of an automated approach. If it was a personalized approach, you can also add a line of personalization. And again, you don't want huge paragraphs about them. Just go on their LinkedIn, add one line of personalization. And I think the reason to keep things short and concise is that there's so many channels nowadays. Like I just mentioned 3: phone, LinkedIn, email. People are on Instagram, Facebook, C-level people at like enterprise companies. If you're using email as well, it's I think especially this year it's become harder and harder to essentially get people's attention. Like I'm like a small business owner, right, with a few people in our company, and I get 100 prospect emails a day. So people at bigger companies, they must literally be getting thousands. So I think you can still get their attention, but the messaging's got to be super sharp and essentially hitting their pain straight away.
And is there a call to action in this email, or is it here is content and then I'll follow up with you in the future?
Yeah, there's different approaches. I like to do like first email. Actually, so you give a piece of content. A thing that some people may not know watching this is if it's a completely cold lead, so it's not an inbound lead that's come to your website, their email server hasn't like recognized your email address. So it's actually best practice not to include links in the first email. So typically what I'll do, I'll say, here's a pain you may face. We've got a piece of content. Would you be interested in seeing it? And then essentially they may say, yes, right, I can send it. Often a good thing about them replying on email, even if it's just a yes, it's got their phone number in. So you can then give them a call, have a conversation with them. So that's one approach. Another approach, if it's further down the line, you may just want to give a piece of content, as I said, like giving without taking. And then further down the line, obviously the goal, as we were talking about, is to get sales qualified leads. So further down the line, you do want to start talking about case studies, but again, very much about their challenges, not talking about your product. We helped another company in this industry solve a challenge that you may be going through. Would you like to explore more about, how we can help you? And with things like calls to action as well, Gong have great content, as I'm sure a lot of people who are listening to this know. And they said how actually, if you put like, are you interested in exploring more or something like that, rather than like, would you like to have a 5-minute call, it increases your reply rate quite a lot. So that's another tip that I have on calls to action.
Sure. And this is a side note. I know lots of marketers listen to the show as well, Michael, so this might be useful for them. But just to reiterate what you said about, I know for us, we've got our email list, I think it's like 110,000 people now. And we changed our first email when you sign up to from a big resource page with loads of links and content to training and videos, which is a great value-packed email. We changed it from that to an email with no links that just asked people to reply to that email with the biggest problem in sales. And we use this to create content on the back of. We track, I've got it on my board in there. It's basically a tally chart, right, of different groups, different individuals and what their problems are. And we create podcasts and content on the back of that. But our spam hitting the inbox rate, or the opposite of that, not being in spam, went up by, it's like 3,000%. It was the numbers are insane by just getting a reply from a lot of people that email went to. Because I guess the email servers are getting more and more sophisticated to try and combat all of this spam that we're all facing, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And good example. I'll use your example when I'm next explaining that to my clients, because a lot of them don't believe me. They're like, no, you can use links. It's fine. It's, well, yeah, maybe 20% will open your email, but what if you could get 50% by excluding links, Yeah,
it's mad. And I don't know. Here's a question for you then, because a lot of our emails are going to, for example, Gmail, I don't know, Outlook, whatever, people's personal email addresses. How does this change with cadences when it's going to if you're sending an email to Salesforce, and I assume they have their own mail servers with their own algorithms and spam filtering. Does our approach have to change if we were emailing a personal email address versus a corporate email address?
I've never done that. Like I've had, which I always find interesting. So this whole sales cadence, actually, one of the reasons it became a viral bit of content, I essentially didn't create a landing page, but I knew our biggest following was on LinkedIn. So I did a LinkedIn post saying, would you like to see the ultimate outbound sales cadence? 30 touches. That's kind of got people's attention. Then I got 1,600 comments underneath. Actually, had to hire a team of people in the Philippines to go through it. But the reason I'm saying this is I was surprised because a lot of people, when we followed up and said what email should we send the cadence to, they actually replied with their personal emails, right? So I was thinking, it's kind of strange. A lot of people don't like having personal emails as well. There's a lot of websites where you essentially have to put your business email address. But I haven't really changed the approach. And I think you could actually look at personal emails as even better in a sense, because you have your personal email for life, whereas you only have your business email like while you're with that business. And most people are changing jobs more than ever before. So I think that's something to think about. And from a marketing perspective, I don't know if you can do this anymore with GDPR, but I'll tell you about something we used to do at my last company. Is typically people have personal email addresses on their LinkedIn. There used to be a function on LinkedIn that's not there anymore, where if you were connected with someone, you could get their personal email address. We used to take those and then put them into Facebook targeting, because also on Facebook, people have their personal email addresses. So it's much easier to target people on Facebook through personal email addresses rather than business email addresses. So actually people hate personal emails, but they have their advantages as well.
Yeah, we do exactly the same. And, we'll go into it, but all kinds of pixeling and stuff that we do with people who visit the site and come to the podcast and stuff. We do right this second, we do zero marketing on anything for our sales training product, paid marketing other than on Facebook. And Facebook just blows everything else out of the water. We tried LinkedIn. We've never managed to get LinkedIn to be profitable. YouTube worked, but didn't have the ROI that Facebook did. YouTube is something that we need to reinvestigate in probably towards the end of this year. But yeah, anyway, we'll put all the marketing nonsense to one side for a second, Michael. Okay, so we've got this first email. We've laid it out now. Hopefully people can go away from this and they can create a really great email from that. Whether we get a reply or not, what is the next step of our cadence?
After you've done the email, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, I normally send them a LinkedIn request. for the LinkedIn message, there's either two things. One, which is controversial as well, don't say anything at all, because I think if you send a really long message as a LinkedIn request, people instantly think they're trying to sell you something. So either don't say anything at all, or literally send one line, that's it, for a connection request, and say, oh, I love your Salesman podcast, and that's it. Because people put out content because they want you to listen to it, right? So if you can complement their content, a lot of people will accept. And then from there, I actually typically do a phone call after that. And I like to pair the LinkedIn with the phone call. And the reason I do that is because when you've gone on LinkedIn, you've had a look at their profile, and then you can use some of those nuggets. So say I was like a marketing agency, for example, I could say, hey, Will, notice you got this brilliant Salesman podcast. Notice you had Michael Hanson on as a guest. What's your strategy to increase your YouTube followers? And then it's highly personalized rather than we do digital marketing, SEO, blah, 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 and we're the best, which is what a lot of people are doing, unfortunately.
And so if the first email is to kind of introduce yourself and lead with value, so you're not immediately shoving your pitch down people's throats, then you've done the same on LinkedIn. You've connected with them again without holding back from shoving your pitch down people's throats. So immediately you're in people's good books, right? Especially an executive, someone who has funding rather than like just a mere mortal like me who has no funding for nothing but is yet getting pitched all the time, right? What is the point of if we do get them on the phone, what is the point of that phone call? Is it, again, to give them more content, insights, to have a conversation with them, or is it to then perhaps pitch the pitch in a future phone call?
Yeah, I slightly differ with the LinkedIn and email approach. Now, I think it is good to get a meeting on that call. And the only reason is because the phone is actually an interactive channel. So I think the first goal is to identify if they have a pain that you can help with. So that's why, I asked that question if I was trying to sell digital marketing for you. What's your strategy to increase your YouTube subscribers? And your strategy may be brilliant. And I'm like, okay, they don't need help with that. I'm going to ask about something else.
So we're qualifying them, right? Is that what we're looking at?
Yeah, it's kind of qualifying and probing. You kind of ask a qualifying question. Like I may, if I'm switching now to Growth Genie, I may be like, oh, I noticed on Indeed you're hiring SDRs, is that correct? And that's kind of a qualifying question, because I know maybe Indeed the data's wrong, sometimes they aren't actually hiring SDRs. And then if they say yes, then it may start probing, like, oh, how successful are your SDRs at the moment, and what types of playbooks do you have in place, etc. And then if they say everything's perfect, like outbound's not a problem, we need help with inbound, I'm going to be like, well, that's not actually my expertise, so I'm not going to try and pitch them. But if they start telling me they've got a load of pains when it comes to outbound, then I'm going to start having a conversation and essentially try and get them on a next meeting. Yep. So that's why the phone is still so powerful for outbound. And even though a connect rate on a phone can be as low as like 2%, you have to call someone 30 times just for them to pick up once, people still do it because you can have a lot more of an interactive conversation rather than a LinkedIn message or an email. Would you consider, after either a series of emails or a series of even voicemails and LinkedIn messages, if you've had zero response, would you consider that you picking up the phone as a cold call? Yeah, it's a good point that you make. I think less about warm calling. So I think that's the other thing now. People are talking about cold calling still, like cold calling doesn't work, etc. But I think it depends how you define a cold call, because if you do your research, like I said, if you go on LinkedIn, find out that, Will Barron does a Salesman podcast, or go on my LinkedIn and see that, we are teaching people how to do cadences, then it makes that call a lot warmer. And again, if you're seeing that people are clicking on your email content, if they're opening your email multiple times, it's like 30 opens, they probably forwarded it to someone, then it makes that conversation a lot warmer potentially. The only issue with that is, like we were talking about email security earlier, a lot of companies now, they've got email servers that will essentially click on your links and open it multiple times. So you have to be careful of that. It's not always the case. But certainly everything's connected, like you were saying. So if they're interacting a lot, like the phone is the best channel to actually get a meeting, like I said. But if they're interacting a lot on LinkedIn and email, then it makes it a lot easier to book that meeting on the phone. Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that, because I feel like, especially on LinkedIn, especially when people are trying to get attention, but they don't know how to get attention, everyone's saying cold calling's dead. Cold calling's not dead. It's
stupid conversation, right? But if someone, well, no one has my number, so no one can cold call me. There's an open challenge to the audience. I think it's like $500 I put on it, right? Anyone can cold call me, and I've not given them my number for kind of a business deal that we're doing on something else. Then I'll just give them $500. So that's an open thing to the audience, right? And no one has my number, so no one could cold call me. But if someone did cold call me, that it would have to be an incredible, like, opening 2-3 seconds for me to really give them any time, because we're all busy, right? But if someone had emailed me and I'd opened it and got, okay, it's not for me, then they added me on LinkedIn and then another email and a voicemail, and then they got through to me on the phone, I'm almost, because I want salespeople to win, right? And I think most people with a budget, or even if they don't think that, even if they've never thought about this, they probably are of a mindset of, I'll give them a chance. And I feel like if you just show that effort, and everything is, everything is kind of targeted and tailored towards me, content-wise, I feel like I would give that person at least the opportunity to speak with me. So I know this is massively anecdotal, but I just wanted to kind of emphasize that I feel like I'll go one step further than you, Michael. I feel like we really are warming up calls with a cadence, and I feel like if we did have the numbers on it, it would make a massive difference.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like I want to do this challenge now. I'm up for trying to use my network to get
go
your
for
number.
It. Honestly, if you can do it, $500 coming your way. I think I will put it this way. I had I don't know if I'll name him, because I've had someone with one of the biggest kind of like database companies, the CEO of the company, try and get my number. And he's emailed me a couple of times now, and every time it's been the wrong number. So I don't even know where the numbers he's pulling are coming from, but it's nowhere near. So good luck if you want to try that. Again, open offer for the audience there. So with that, right, so let's say that this is all going to shit, and we went in with good intentions, and now we're cursing Michael and Will because nothing's happening. No emails are getting opened, no replies, no one's responded to us on LinkedIn. We've called a few times, somehow we got the number, we've called a few times, we've left a few messages, and we've had zilch back. But it's a potential great account, and so we want to keep going at it. What happens in kind of step 2, 3, 4, and when do we give up on a cadence?
Yeah, so I think you mentioned at the start is 30 touches, which I preach, which again is some people think it's madness. And the reason is, typically looking at like 10 to 15 calls, like between 6 and 8 emails, 6 and 8 LinkedIn messages. But there's a lot of background for this. One is that so I used to work with an outsourced SDR firm, help grow the business, but also a lot on the operations side. We're seeing what works, what didn't work with different industries and clients. And I noticed that when our accounts were doing like 20 to 30 touches versus like 10 to 20 touches, they were a lot more successful, which is how this came about. My colleague Lawrence as well, he's very old school, like hustler mentality, and he actually, I think, changed my opinion a lot, because I was before one of those like 10 to 15 touches people, and I would see him forget 30 touches, I would see him get meetings on like the 45th touch. I mean, this approach works. But to look at like the science behind it, right? As I said earlier, typically a connect rate for a cold call, and I think this data comes from a company called Connect and Sell, who've analyzed millions of calls through their dialer, is I think on average about 4%. So that means literally you need to call someone over 20 times to get them to pick up once. So that's a bit why you need to do, like I said, 10 to 15 calls, but you could do like 20 calls. I always recommend double dialing as well. So you call someone once, if they don't answer, you call them again. And the logic behind that is that how many times you even miss a call from like your aunt or your grandma or whatever, so let alone like a cold number, you're not going to answer that first time often. And then if you look at like an email, and again, if you, some of the vendors who do sales engagement like Apollo or Outreach or any of these people, they advise their clients to do more touches, because they know across their accounts, the guys that are doing 6 touches versus 3 touches, they're getting more meetings. And it's actually, even though the messaging has to be right, it's also numbers, because if you've got 6 different emails, you've got 6 different opportunities to connect with someone, or 6 different subject lines to get them to open versus just 3. So it's essentially expanding that. And you can do different approaches, right? If you've just got 2 emails, you're probably not going to do my whole giving on the first email. You're going to go straight for the meeting. Sure. So it's just a bit more opportunity to nurture, etc. So that's kind of the logic behind it.
And I'm not putting you on the spot here, I'm going to ask you, in case there is data on this, Michael, how much of this comes down to the fact that the first 2 emails you send are at a time when the person has different priorities. But by the time you've sent the 30th call or email or bit of cadence, things have quieted down for them, or the company's changed, or they finally made the acquisition that you were preaching about and kind of pitching them on in the first instance. How much of this comes down to just the fact that if you go at people long enough, circumstances will change, and then you're likely to get a deal from that?
Yeah, 100%. I think sales is that balance, right, between quality and quantity. And then, like we were talking about earlier, like personalization and automations coming into it. But yeah, a lot of it is timing, which is where, even though I think your messaging needs to be really good, you need to also accept from a timing issue, right? If you go after a bigger group of people, it's going to be the right time for some of them. So yeah, 100%, like by the end of the cadence, maybe they're warmed up. And that's why I never finish a sales cycle with someone. Even if someone goes through the 30 touches, I'll put them in marketing nurturing sequence. And then 3 months later, contact them again. So yeah, everything's timing. And I think the other thing, and could be very controversial for a lot of people, because I know I see loads of abuse about this online, and I see a lot of these sales influencers on LinkedIn, having a go at, junior salespeople for these terrible product pitches that they're sending. And I try to be empathetic. I was the same when I first started in sales. My messaging was terrible. I used to send long emails pitching products with 6 different questions. So I sympathize with those guys, and I say the only thing worse than sending a really bad sales email is sending nothing at all. And the reason is even if you do that really bad sales email, that product pitch, it may resonate with 0.01% of the audience who they just have the need at that time. So that person's got away with being a bad salesperson. And if you start as well, you're going to get feedback. I try to give back to the community. So sometimes if I get a really bad email, I actually did it this morning, and I said, look, just have 1 sentence and 1 question. Don't send me 8 paragraphs, and you'll be more successful. So I think you've always got to start somewhere. And I think a lot of these sales influencers, they can't look back at the start of their career and kind of the mistakes that they made.
Yeah. And I've rinsed people for really crappy emails in the past, but I guess I'm coming from a different perspective of rinsing people because it was not necessarily the content of the email. I just feel like I've been spammed at. And I don't. Yeah. We can either have different thoughts on this, or you can tell me your thoughts, Michael. But is it ever okay for a salesperson just have a list of 1,000 people and just send them, not even put the first name at the beginning of the email, or get the first name wrong? Is that ever appropriate for a sales cadence?
No, it's not at all. It goes back to what I said at the start, which is segregating your list, right? Yeah. So if you've got 1,000 people, segregate into job titles, segregate into industry, segregate into triggers, and then you may have 10 lists of 100 people, and then you can still automate, but your messaging is going to be relevant to those 10 different groups. So that's what I'd recommend. And then I think if you get the name wrong, unfortunately with automation, that's often that comes down to the data, right? You got bad data and you've got the person's name wrong in the spreadsheet. So.
Yeah. And look, I've sent emails before, of course, and you put the wrong name on, or you copy and pasted or something, but I don't mind that as long as there's an email that follows 5 minutes later going, oh shit, well, I've screwed up here. That's fine. It perhaps even humanizes you as long as you're not using it as a tactic, right? Okay, so final one on this before I want to get into just a brief look at the software and how we implement some of this. What does the messaging look like in the middle of the cadence? Perhaps it's email 9. Are we still just doing short emails with a piece of useful content, hopefully on the back of a trigger event, or do they kind of funnel people more and more towards a call to action or a pitch?
Yeah, it's more a pitch. So I think kind of as you go through the email sequence, we're almost going further down the funnel. So as I said, things like sharing a case study, make sure the case study is relevant to their industry or their job title. So say, I helped another sales leader in the cybersecurity SaaS space with their SDR team, but 4 times more meetings than they were before. Would you like to see if we can replicate the results for company name, right? So that's a kind of approach that looking for. So still messaging that's very relevant to them, but more bottom of the funnel, right? This is essentially what we can do. This is the benefit and how we can solve your challenge within your industry. So yeah, things like case studies are great. I also find, always talking about the content approach, maybe a little bit before that case study, take something from that content. So it's not even a report that we have, but there's a report about SDR metrics, and it says on average, having interviewed thousands of sales leaders, it takes 3 months to ramp up an SDR team. I know that a pain for buyers is the time it takes to train and ramp up an SDR team. So say, according to the Bridge Group, it takes 3 months to ramp up an SDR. How long does it take your company? And then that kind of gets them thinking. And again, if I then call them and get on a conversation with them, so you just kind of proposing all these questions, getting them thinking, and then by the time you present that case study and ask for a meeting, they're often a lot more open to it, like you said, because they feel like you can actually help them rather than just being another salesperson.
Yeah, I feel like there's a level of inception that could be done here, right? With an almost offhand comment like that, you could go, well, you could change people's paradigms with a simple comment like that of, they might think that it is appropriate for 6 months to ramp up a SDR team. They might think that, I've done this the past 5 startups that I've been at. They might not realize that other people are doing it in 3 months. So is that fair to say that we can incept them a little bit and put things at the back of their mind that will eventually lead them to our product or service?
Yeah, 100%. My aim is to get them thinking and to get them to challenge what their current process is. Because you've got 2 types of leads, right? Like we were saying before, you've got that person who just has that need at that time, and you can get really lucky, and even with bad sales messaging. But then you've got the ones where they almost don't know they have a challenge. Mm-hmm. So like you said, it's almost like Inception. You're trying to make them aware they've got this challenge. And then when they realize it, they're like, okay, Will or Michael, they're the person that made me realize I have this challenge. I need to speak with them.
Yeah, and immediately you're at the forefront of the conversation at that point, right?
Exactly. And then even things, from like it's almost like a marketing type tactic where you like how you would have digital ads in front of someone or your YouTube videos, etc. After people are following your content and is very relevant to the problems that that they have, they're naturally going to come to you.
Yeah, I think, tell me if you agree with this, I think a lot of marketing, whether people agree with this or not, or whether people think it's more sophisticated than this, I think a lot of it is just impressions. If I see Michael enough times on LinkedIn, I'm going to go, it's probably all right, Tim. I don't know what, there's something to that. And I meet people who listen to the show, especially, not there's been any conferences this year, but at conferences and events, and they come over and everyone's dead excited. I'm excited to meet people as well. And they feel like they know me because they know all about the car and the jiu-jitsu and all this kind of stuff. And I had no idea who they are or what they do. But I feel like, is that again something fair to say, that just the number of impressions that you have in front of someone over and over and over again, as long as they are positive ones, that has a massive influence on people's kind of perception of you?
Yeah, definitely. And that's why, there's a big thing about people say you should try and post on LinkedIn on as many days as you can. I think the algorithm doesn't like you to post too much, but that's why I try to post Monday to Friday. And again, the algorithm will favor that, but it's also just about getting my content in front of people, right? Like I was saying about the sequence, if I have 6 emails versus 3, I've got 6 chances to resonate with someone. It's the same in LinkedIn. If I'm posting 5 days a week instead of 1, I've got 5 opportunities to resonate with someone rather than 1. So yeah, completely agree about the impressions.
Cool. Okay, so we've got the content in the first 3 emails. We've got the content in the middle and how it's kind of pushing towards getting a meeting. We've got what we should say essentially on the phone. We've got this element of Inception. How do we now all put this together and build this cadence? Do we need expensive software? Can we do this on the cheap if our company isn't going to pay? They want to see it in action before they invest in Outreach or someone. How do we go about implementing this, Michael?
Yeah, I'd recommend getting a sales engagement tool. I'm pretty vendor neutral, so we partner with all of them. They've all got different strengths and weaknesses. I think if you're going to do this, like you should in any process as a buyer, look at different ones. But we partner with Outreach, SalesLoft, Apollo. Apollo is quite a good one if you're a small business because it also comes with data included as well. So you can kind of get the data and then actually contact those people as well. And essentially you want a tool that helps you organize the cadence. So you can build a cadence and it will say, like I said, you log in and first thing in the morning it says, okay, you're going to call these 50 people, then you're going to email these 50 people and send them a LinkedIn message. So you want something that's got that capability. So as long as it's got a dialer, as long as you can do email automation and it can set up tasks, that's essentially all you need. The 3 I mentioned are good, and there's a ton of different platforms out there that I recommend.
Good stuff. And I know you've got a new ultimate outbound sales cadence that hopefully we'll be able to put in the show notes retrospectively when the show airs, because we're recording this before it's gone out. But is that the starting point? Is that kind of is the starting point to get a blueprint from, or the starting point is to work with yourself, right? But other than that, is it to get a blueprint and then kind of meld it to our own kind of messaging?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I think the step before a cadence, we help SDRs build cadences. We try to do it with them rather than write it for them.
Sure.
So that they're the ones learning. But the step before that is essentially to write a playbook, because once you've got a good playbook, so the term playbook means different things to different people. So I explain kind of our terminology of playbook is essentially like a centralized messaging document that's not for any specific channel. It's just like, what are your buyer challenges? What are some probing or discovery questions you can ask relate to that? Some qualifying questions. What are the triggers, like we mentioned? What are some questions you can ask around the triggers? What's your value proposition, essentially your pitch? And it's always got to be about solving those challenges that you've identified. And then objection handling, competitor analysis, etc. I recommend if you don't have that kind of centralized messaging document, build that first. That's like a messaging document that every new SDR can have. And then once you've got that, then you start building the messaging across, email, LinkedIn, phone, etc.
Got it. Cool. And then final thing to wrap things up there, Michael, what is one misconception about building sales cadences, or what is one thing that you see, especially from sales experts on LinkedIn, that you just want to smack your forearm into your head every time you see it? What is something that everyone's getting wrong that we shouldn't be getting wrong?
Yeah, I think that if you're doing 30 touches, that you're essentially just like spamming people, right? And that you shouldn't automate everything. And like you should have like a 3-touch, super personalized email cadence. Like, yeah, of course that can work. But for me, it's like we were saying, it's the timing issue of it as well. So if you can add more content that's super relevant, as long as you're keeping it super relevant, that's fine. So I think people who really have a hate of automation, like automation is terrible, I think it's just because they've been on the receiving end of terrible automation, and they think if they're going to do that, then they don't want to be like that terrible automation they've received. So I think don't hate automation, just put a lot of effort into your data and those triggers and industries like I mentioned, and then essentially your message can seem personalized even if it's actually automated.
Perfect. Well, with that, Michael, tell us where we can find out more about you, everything that you're up to, in case anyone wants to kind of bring you into, because this is getting complicated, right? To bring you into kind of lessen the burden here.
Yeah, sure. So our website is growthgenie.co, not .com. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the domain. And then my email address is mhanson@growthgenie.co. And finally, connect with me on LinkedIn. So I'm Michael Hanson, Growth Genie. If you type that into LinkedIn, I'll come up. As I mentioned earlier in the show, I try to post content Monday to Friday, and always happy to connect with anyone, whether you're an SDR, VP of sales, whatever. Happy to connect and always share advice.
Good, man. Well, I'll link to all that in the show notes to this episode over at salesman.org. And with that, Michael, I want to thank you for your time, your energy in this. And I really appreciate the content that you do post on LinkedIn. Everyone should, listening now, go and find you on there. And with that, I want to thank you again for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thanks so much, Will. It's been a pleasure to be here.